Great. Well, thank you everybody for coming down. And I'll apologize. This isn't in my. I've got a script to help me through things, but this isn't in it. I'll apologise straight away for it's a bit formal because I was hoping for a few more people that I didn't know. So anyway, for those who don't know me, I thought I'd just describe what I do and a bit about who I am and what I've done. So although I describe myself as a musician and a composer, it might be more accurate to describe what I do is existing within the temporal arts. I work with sound, video, light and sometimes dance, all from a perspective of musical composition. Perhaps for me, medium isn't as important as the idea, the intent and the attempt to communicate. I am also a music educator. During the early stages of writing this talk, I thought I'd discuss certain aspects of how I compose. However, I believe it is vital to know one's history and the effects it has upon us. So as a way of giving you some insight to my composerly thoughts and practices, and providing me with a chance to reflect, I'm going to share some notes on music history, briefly discussing some composers who have had a profound impact on my musical thinking. So what follows may be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, and of course there are a lot of composers who I'm going to be unable to cover, but to aid the discussion I've made a very simple web page with links to Wikipedia for you to follow along with, view after the talk and also share if you want. So that is, oops, there. I'm just going to leave that on there so you can get hold of that if you want to. So I was taught recorder and violin at school before teaching myself the guitar around the age of 10. I played rhythm and lead guitar in a punk rock band between the ages of 17 to 25, recorded an album through a record label and gigged a lot. The band was made up of my best friends, so we hung out all the time, practiced as often as we could, listened to the same music and went to gigs together. Creativity was an almost daily occurrence. This stopped around 2007 when I was promoted from guitar tutor to department coordinator at the music academy where I worked. Around the same time, our singer was in a car accident which left him immobile for several years, but he's now fully recovered and has fathered 2 children, so he's doing alright. Musical creativity and discovery ground to an absolute halt as I spent all of my energy on improving my teaching, which I loved. Around 2011, I started to feel a little agitated, wanting music to be more than just a subject I'd taught, but I didn't want to retrograde and start gigging again. Because up to this point I'd only ever created music in collaborative ways. The time was ripe for some reinvention, so I enrolled in a Bachelor of Music degree at university, securing a fee waiver scholarship for my first year, and after 5 very long, excruciating, that's my wife, she can attest to this, yet glorious years, I graduated with a first-class degree, an article published in a peer-reviewed journal, a full fee waiver scholarship to study a master's degree, a 3rd fee waiver scholarship to study a PhD, which I haven't taken, and a very new outlook on music and professional life. Yeah, typical him. Alright, cool. So, that's enough about me, let's go on to some music. I've arranged a brief glimpse at some composers who have in some way shaped my musical thinking. I'd like to start at the early 20th century, discussing the emergence of technology and its effect on music making. This will lead us up to the 1950s and a discussion around some of the physical aspects of music, such as music created for a particular room or music that uses physical space in some way. And that will take us up to talking about sound art and what it might mean to be a composer in the 21st century. Will it work now? Yes. Alright. So, in 1913, Luigi Russolo, who was an Italian futurist born in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, wrote a manifesto entitled The Art of Noises. In it he wrote, "As it grows ever more complicated today, musical art seeks out combinations more dissonant, stranger and harsher for the ear. Thus it comes ever closer to the noise sound." Russolo believed that traditional instruments are no longer capable of capturing the imagination of a culture immersed in noise. Russolo devised noise instruments, or intonarumori, I'll practice that, in order to realise his musical concepts, delivering his first public performance in 1914. I'm just going to listen to a bit of his, where's my cursor? I'm just going to listen to a bit of that now, and apologies if it's a bit loud.
It can go louder if you want it.
Can it?
Yeah.
If we could, that'd be nice, yeah. That might have been a bit of a soft recording though, but... okay, so, the following decade, during the 1920s, Arnold Schoenberg was composing music for traditional, or what we might call normal instruments. His compositions challenged the grammar of music, which had long been established and taught in Western academic institutions. Schoenberg disregarded these long-established rules that surround how chords and notes move. You know, one note or group of notes would lead or move to another particular note to create groups of notes and narrative. I should point out that far from being a disbeliever in traditional harmony and history, Schoenberg was in fact a noted scholar of harmony, writing detailed and somewhat verbose literature on advanced topics. Schoenberg understood that in order for music to be truly expressive in the 20th century, it had to move away from more traditional sonority, so in a way he was forced to become a rebel. Okay, so my heading. Let's have a listen to some of his. Alright, so quite a bit different to what Russell was doing. Okay, now another decade later, during the 1930s, Edgar Varèse completely disregarded the conventional distinctions between noise and music, preferring to refer to music as organised sound. Basically, he was saying that any sound can be a musical sound. This was a giant leap forward in thinking about musical composition and sound, made possible by imagination and the development of audio recording equipment. If we say of Russell that he was invested in a music inspired by industrial and concrete sounds of everyday life, then we possibly can say that Varèse's music was born from aspects of science. Varèse described himself as a worker in rhythms, frequencies and intensities. Varèse didn't create noise-making instruments like Russell, nor did he work exclusively with traditional instruments like Schoenberg. Varèse focused on the sounds themselves, the very qualities that made the sounds distinct, so timbre, texture and space. Today the concept of sound in its own right remains firmly rooted within modern compositional practice, including electronic, ambient and electroacoustic music, as well as within instrumental, experimental and avant-garde practices. Varèse's 1929 to 1931 piece, Ionization, is a balanced and well-constructed composition made using traditional instruments, noisy instruments and sound recordings, such as sirens, sleigh bells and a lion's roar. Now, 1940s, Pierre Schaeffer began his first experiments with what he later termed musique concrète and developments into acousmatic listening. Acousmatic listening was based on the idea of a sound source being stripped of any visual clues to its origin. This was a notion driven by the development of recording technology. Being able to hear the sound of an object without having the object physically present is something we very much take for granted these days. For Schaeffer, sound without any other stimulus was sound in its idealised form, which he termed sound objects. Being able to have the listener focus on the sound alone, rather than seeing and hearing the object, was revolutionary for Schaeffer. So a quick listen to one of his. So, from 1913, the start of the 20th century, up to 1940, several people were finding ways of accessing and using noise and sounds other than those created by normal or traditional instruments, as had been the norm for hundreds of years previous. So it's an important point. But what was also needed, what we also need to understand is that these composers weren't simply attempting to replace one sound source with another, French horn for car horn, for example. They were trying to create new genres or new ways of making music. So around the 1950s, technology was becoming cheaper, and how the world works. Art helps us interpret what reality means. Experiencing the use of noise in and as music, as well as raising the awareness of violative noise on not only our species but other species, and it has enhanced my awareness and sensitivity of my own impact on the sonic environment and the domain of musical composition. So we're going to move on to composers who use reflective or careful listening when creating their music. We've heard about some composers who use noise as an instrument, but there are also composers who work with the room space itself to create music, or even as an instrument itself. Wrong way, that way. Okay. So, Alvin Lucia's tape piece, 1969 tape piece, I Am Sitting in a Room, made use of technology as well as the physical space or sound of a room. I was going to read what I've written about Lucia, but it's better to hear it from him himself. What I'm going to play now is the actual piece. I'm going to play about a minute and a half, and then about a minute, and then cut through so you can hear what's going on. So the actual text here is part of the piece. It's him reading out, and he had a bit of a stutter, so you'll detect certain parts of that in his speech.
I am sitting in a room different from the one you are in now. I am recording the sound of my speaking voice, and I am going to play it back into the room again and again until the resonant frequencies of the room reinforce themselves, so that any semblance of my speech, with perhaps the exception of rhythm, is destroyed. What you will hear then are the natural resonant frequencies of the room articulated by speech. I regard this activity not so much as a demonstration of a physical fact, but more as a way to smooth out any irregularities my speech might have. I am sitting in a room different from the one you are in now.
You can hear a slight change to the
I am recording the sound of my speaking voice.
I'm going to skip this forward a little, about 5 minutes, so you can hear what it sounds like after 5 minutes.
I am sitting in a room different from the one you are in now.
So that's just made by looping into the room the same recording and recording it onto another machine, playing that back into the room, recording on another machine, and again and again
and again, until the...
Let's move on a bit, 16 minutes in. In. So a lovely piece, and obviously going through it in a blink of an eye like that, you don't get the gradual effect or anything. So I encourage you to listen. It's on YouTube, I believe. Okay. So, from the 1960s, Paul Oliveros was working with recording technology such as tape delays and synthesizers, designing and building some of her own, as well as natural acoustic phenomena. One of Oliveros' best known pieces, Bye Bye Butterfly, is an amazing deconstruction of a recording of Puccini's opera Madame Butterfly. As well as tape pieces, Oliveros also composed for soloist ensembles in dance and theatre, and was an accomplished accordion player using several different tuning systems. Oliveros developed her own approach to music and listening, which was a sort of meditative approach to sound itself, working a lot with mindful and sensitive techniques of musical improvisation. Oliveros discovered the deep listening phenomenon around 1989, roughly the same time she was working in an abandoned underground cistern. The cistern had a reverb time of 45 seconds. 45 seconds in a natural space. That means any sound made in this space would echo or reverberate for 45 seconds. Quite a time. Quite a lot of time, that. Let's listen to a snippet of Bye Bye Butterfly. So, Morton Feldman was a composer who worked with traditional instrumentation. I find the way he thought about and approached composition to be highly motivating. Like the other composers I've mentioned so far, Feldman had a focus on sound itself rather than creating music that followed traditional rules of harmony or melody to create a narrative. Feldman was part of what was affectionately referred to as the New York School of painters, poets, composers, musicians, so named because they all lived and worked in New York. Other members included John Cage, Earl Brown, Christian Wolfe and David Tudor. This group of musicians and composers created some of the most thoughtful, perplexing and downright wonderful music I've ever heard, studied and performed. Feldman owned a collection of Anatolian rugs, which is like part of Western Asia, which is now modern day Turkey, I think, speaking and writing a lot about his interest in how there appeared to be considerably less concern with the exact repetition within the pattern than in most rug producing areas. He noticed that the detail of the symmetry was never mathematical. This prompted Feldman to think of a disproportionate symmetry in which a symmetrically staggered rhythmic series could be used, such as 4 against 3, 6 against 5, 8 against 7, as a way to arrange sounds. In some of his pieces, Feldman creates a very delicate or fragile soundscape, as if he in fact does not want much or any sound to be audible. It's as if Feldman treats silence, or in fact the lack of it, as being extremely precious. This is crippled symmetry. from the New York School, as I mentioned, was John Cage, and he's well known as an avant-garde or experimental composer with a vast output of music, publications, lectures, interviews and appearances on popular American television programs in the mid-20th century. I often found myself in awe and also frustrated in equal measure by Cage's work. It's really quite challenging to pin his music down, so I'll only discuss a few aspects of his compositional approach. Cage worked with all manner of sound material, from traditional instrumentation through to audio recording, theatre, radio and performances specifically written for live television. The Perilous Night, written in between 1943 and 1944 during a very difficult period in Cage's life, is an amazing study of rhythm. This is a piece written for the prepared piano, which is an invention of Cage's requiring objects to be applied directly to the strings inside the piano. Screws, coins, erasers, all inserted carefully between the strings at very specific points along the string. Many of the preparations are, like a lot of Cage's work, meticulous as to achieve a very specific sound. Cage devised the prepared piano while working on a composition for dance, for which he needed percussion instruments. The physical space he was working in was limited, but he had access to a piano. So he did what Cage does best. Here's a bit of The Perilous Night. Long Player is a 1,000-year-long musical composition which began in 1999. It can be heard a part of it can be heard in the lighthouse at Trinity Buoy Wharf, London. As we live in the shadow of a time where music became a commodity to be used and then discarded, I find a piece that no human being will ever experience in its entirety genuinely pleasing. Following a traditional approach to music composition, Long Player is predetermined from beginning to end. Its movements are calculable, but the scale is so vast it is all but unknowable, similar to a system of planets. Viner's other piece I mentioned is Score for a Hole in the Ground, which is a piece of sonic art located in Kingswood in Kent. Walkers in the wood will come across a large flower-shaped listening or amplification horn, similar to a gramophone horn. The horn sits atop of a natural cave which contains unseen tube percussion. Water moves from the surface and drips into the cave, catching the percussion as it does so, becoming more agitated with heavier rainfall like today, so it'd be really going for it, wouldn't it? Being almost entirely indeterminate, this piece is a beautiful contrast to Einer's fully determined work. I have a bit of video. Let's see if this will make it work. Just going to scrub through a little bit, okay?
That just droplets of water then, just
Yeah, seeping through, hitting the singing bowls and other tuned percussion inside. Yeah, in a cave. Pretty cool. Okay, Peter Ablinger is an Austrian composer working with what some might term abstract approaches to sound and music. I admire Ablinger's courage and artistic integrity while also scratching my head as I interpret his work. One of Ablinger's pieces that stands out to me is the most is his photographic series, part of the Hören, probably butchering that as well, which is Hearing and Listening in English, exhibition series. It is a photograph of a wine glass in motion, I'm going to pass this around in a minute, falling off the edge of a table. This photo definitely possesses sound. It is an imagining sound. I'll look and pass it along. At the other end of Ablinger's spectrum of works is landscape opera in 7 parts. This is a large, nay, massive scale work based in Ulrichsburg, within a small triangle between Germany, Austria and the Czech Republic. The first act features tree plantations arranged according to acoustic criteria such as colour and intensity of noise. For the second act, the audience is given 14 locations to walk to, which Ablinger names as listening proposals. The third act, called The Melody, is a sound archive containing about 24 hours of field recordings of Ulrichsburg and its vicinity. Act 4 is a 3-wall video projection space with portraits of 18 people from Ulrichsburg telling their own unique story in their own way. An interactive computer-controlled piano is connected with a microphone that transfers the everyday sounds of Ulrichsburg main street in real time to the piano to make up the 5th act. I'm going to say that one again. The 5th act is an interactive computer-controlled piano which is connected with a microphone that transfers everyday sounds of Ulrichsburg's main street in real time to the piano. We're going to see a little bit of something like that in a minute. The 6th act is comprised of scholars of the Ulrichsburg Primary School who used recorded audio material from the 3rd act as a base for short performances, and the final act was a festive concert for chamber ensemble, symphony orchestra and local groups of which I know nothing about. So this is cool, right? This is called the talking piano. So if you remember Alvin Lucia spoke into the room and then recorded that back. This was, a small boy was given some text to read out, that was recorded, and what Ablinger's done is created a device, basically, that sits on top of the piano, and it's basically it's pneumatic, I think, that controls snooker cue tips, and they press the keys. And what's actually going on when you see this, there are no speakers, this is the piano making all these sounds. Okay. Skip through it and get a closer. There might be a close-up of it. Oh no.
Terrifying!
Yeah. Pretty cool though.
Robot.
Brilliant. Just that guy's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I think I'll put it up here. Yeah, prompted my research into cross-modal sound and music. Fantastic. Okay. So, Jonathan Burrows is a choreographer, and Matteo Fargian is a composer, working in their own rights but also come together to create very unique pieces. The piece Both Sitting Duet is a direct translation, note for note, bar for bar, of the violin and piano piece called For John Cage, written by a composer we've heard about today, Morton Feldman. The piece is a faithful arrangement in choreography for 2 performers with striking results. Burrows and Fargian transform musical notation into motions of the body, clearly working with rhythm and all aspects of pitch contained in Feldman's piece. ashamed to say that I made it to my early 30s without ever really knowing about Samuel Beckett, and was really surprised to see how many creative fields he worked in. I've read several of his novels and seen some of his films some of the films made of his plays, but there is one of his pieces that really resonates with me for today's discussion. It is Beckett's careful use of repetition and structure in Not I that is really outstanding, as well as the striking complete audiovisual makeup or mise en scène of the work. Not I, 1972, is a play for solo actor. The stage is set in complete and total darkness, and the actor dressed in black, with only the mouth visible, which is lit by an intense and direct light. I first found the dramatic and torrential speech that spews from this floating, disembodied mouth to be quite alarming, yet familiar, on my first viewing before I became gradually more receptive to the communication. What an effect. The structure and the clear thought and communication in the composition staggers me every time I encounter it.
Of he having vanished, thin air, no sooner buttoned up his breeches, she similarly, 8 months later, almost at a tick, so no love, spared that, no love such as normally vented on the speechless infant in the home, no, nor indeed for that matter, any of any kind, no love of any kind, at any subsequent stage, so, typical affair, nothing of any note till coming up to 60 when, what, 70, God, coming up to 70 when, wandering in a field, looking aimlessly for cowslips to make a ball, a few steps then stop, stare into space, then on, a few more, stop and stare again, so on, drifting around, when suddenly, gradually, all went out, all that early April morning light, and she found herself in the... What? Who? No! She! Found herself in the dark, and if not exactly insentient, for she could still hear the buzzing, so-called, in the ears, and a ray of light came and went, such as the moon might cast, drifting in and out of cloud, but so dulled, feeling so dulled, she did not know what position she was in. Imagine what position she was in, whether standing or sitting, but the brain, what? Kneeling, yes, whether standing or sitting or kneeling, but the brain, what? Lying, yes, whether standing or sitting or kneeling or lying, but the brain still, in a way, for her first thought was, oh, long after, sudden flash, brought up as she'd been to believe with the other waves in the merciful God, her first thought